unless Paul Wasserman is secretly here. Paul Wasserman, welcome. Wonderful. So in that case, our penultimate reader is Stefani Farris. Reading fiction. Fiction also appears in Sisypha, Third Coast, Passages North, Iron Horse Literary Review, Crab Creek Review, and Marlborough Review, and Connotations. She has been a resident at the UCross Foundation and the Island Institute in Sitka, Alaska. She lives in Wyoming with her husband and young son and is currently at work on a novel. Stefani Farris.
I'm going to read from a story called Mercy, which is in this issue of Epiphany. And just briefly, it came out of a couple of things. I was also the daughter of a Navy pilot who was deployed pretty regularly for long chunks of time. And then in 2004, my young cousin, I think he was 20, or he was 19, was deployed to Iraq and was killed within, I think, 2 weeks of arriving. So this was sort of stewing after that. It's called Mercy. The night before Cole's father left for Iraq, he gave Cole a picture book of weapons from all around the world. Medieval lances, spears from the plains of Africa. Ideas, he told Cole, tipping back a bottle of beer. By the time I get home, you'll be putting up a pretty fair fight. He would be gone for 18 months with the Guard, ferrying troops and supplies into combat. For Belinda, there was a gold necklace with a little cluster of pearls, which she put on and took right off, afraid that something would happen. And for their mother, a wool cardigan from the mall in Anchorage. They fired up the grill and ate the last of the year's halibut on the deck. Off in the distance, the mountains were blue and patched with snow. It was a fine May evening, a little cool, though the sun struck them in the face and bounced wildly off the windows of the house. Now that daylight lingered until well after Cole was in bed, it was hard to believe there were whole months of the year when the sun skulked low along the horizon, whole months when this yard and house and the woods around them were caught in a suspended twilight. People bought special lamps during those months and stared straight into them just so they wouldn't go crazy. Now Belinda was rolling her sleeves to her shoulders to get some color. Cole's mother, complaining of a chill, pulled on her new sweater. Did you get a hold of Ken? She said suddenly. Cole's father took a gulp of beer and shook his head. Must already be on the boat. Cole's Uncle Ken lived in a cabin on the Kenai Peninsula and ran deep-sea charters out of Resurrection Bay. Last summer, he'd taken the family halibut fishing, and Cole and Belinda had to promise their parents they wouldn't mention the war, because if Ken got started on that, he'd never quit. Maybe that gal at the bar finally decided she could do worse, Cole's father said. Maybe she finally took him home. He chuckled, but Cole's mother did not smile. He set down his beer and said quietly, "Don't worry, I'll try him from the road." After dinner, Cole's father suggested one last round of Mercy. The game was an invention of Cole's and his father's, played with crude-looking swords and clubs Cole had made himself from PVC pipe, soft foam, and yards of colored duct tape. They gathered the weapons and met in the yard. Their mother took her place on the steps. Her job was referee, a boys' game, she sometimes called Mercy, though Belinda was better at it than any of them. She was worried that one of these days Cole's father would misjudge Cole's strength and take things a little too far. If anything, Cole thought his father was too careful with him, that he did not take things far enough. "Okay," she called, setting down her glass of wine and tugging her new cardigan shut with one hand. "Are you guys ready?" Cole's father set his beer on a stump and wagged the red foam sword over his head. Belinda thumped her club on the ground like a batter stepping to the plate, while the dog ran in giddy circles at her feet. Cole clenched his own sword in both hands. And in some ways, the game that night felt no different. There were the same thuds and grunts when somebody took a weapon in the side. There was the frenzied jostling to stay balanced even as you tried to knock an opponent off. The blur of Belinda's club streaking through the air, accompanied by a peal of laughter. There were the surges of adrenaline that swept through Cole's body in delicious, dizzying waves. There was the shrieking and huffing, the panting, and that same intimate heat of his father's chest when Cole was caught mid-lunge and bear-hugged, drawn in so tight the pounding of his father's heart roared in his ear. Belinda came at their father then with a thumping blow to the back, whose impact Cole could feel through his father's body, and as his father cried, "Oh ho!" and turned to retaliate, Cole was able to get himself free. But he could feel the shift taking place. It was plain on both their faces, his father's and his sister's, and it was there in the silent way their mother watched them from the steps. They all believed this was the end of something. At once, Cole gave Belinda the sign that meant it was time to join forces. They went at their father together then, Belinda from the front, Cole from behind. They grabbed his red sword and sent it flying, worked to wrestle him to the ground. He moaned dramatically as they fought, collapsing finally with a great, exaggerated sigh. Belinda pinned his arms to the grass while Cole climbed onto his chest. They laughed and laughed, trying to catch their breath. Above them, on the deck steps, their mother laughed too. Then they all got quiet. A flock of trumpeter swans had come sailing into view, like a band of white arrows shot over the trees. The swans honked raucously, as if to announce the return after the long winter away, and Belinda, suddenly self-conscious, let go of their father's arms. Cole slid down off his chest. Flat on his back, his breath ragged and spent, their father stared up at the radiant sky. Nobody spoke. It felt like they were waiting, but no one would say for what. Finally, after the noise of the swans had drifted away, Cole's mother stood up. Her sweater slipped from one shoulder and she pulled it back. Holding her hand up to shield her eyes from the sun, she sung out, "It's a tie! I declare a tie." And then I'm going to jump and skip a scene and jump ahead to summer. This following summer. And, Warren is Cole's good friend, who's also another 13-year-old boy who is also going through some of his own sort of soul family battles. Warren asked if Cole was afraid his father would not come back. This was in June, just a month into the deployment. They were sitting on the cliffs above the lake. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night, and the Arctic sun, still high and strong, gave the patch of water below them a deep rosy glow. The scent of wild mint growing along the shore drifted up. "I think I would be," Warren said, slapping a mosquito on the back of his neck. He examined the streak on his palm before wiping it on his towel. Beside him, Cole felt the first twinge of a shiver creeping along his arm. His hair dripped into his eyes, and his wet shorts clung to his legs. He drew up his knees and hugged them, struggling to swallow the words, already formed and whole in his mouth. Stupid, how can you be so stupid? But some deep part of him knew the question was fair. For a time after the war had begun, Cole's father thought his unit would not be called up. He'd go, of course, no question, but so many of the state's guard troops were already active that the governor was worried about coverage at home. There were fires and earthquakes here, bad storms along the coast every fall. So even as accounts of the war grew dire, Cole's family had held out hope. Then, at some point, things started to change. They always do, kiddo, Cole's father told him that last night at home, long after the game in the backyard had ended. He'd just gotten off the phone with his brother and was tossing pair after pair of folded black socks into a gaping duffel on his bed. "There's anything you can count on, Cole, you can count on that." And sure enough, there he was the next day at Coulis, Cole's own father, climbing up into the belly of a C-130 with all the other uniformed men and women. He'd paused before ducking inside and scanned the crowded tarmac for his family, pressing his hand to his heart when he found them. "Life's funny," Cole's mother said on a long drive home. The rain was starting, and in the front seat, Belinda murmured under her breath, "Kiss it goodbye, Dad, no rain in the desert," and then she'd begun to cry. And Cole, suddenly carsick, had opened his window and stuck his face out like the dog. "I'm 41 years old," his mother said over the rush of wind and rain pelting Cole's cheeks, "and all I can say for sure is sometimes life is funny." The next day, the chaplain's wife drove out to have coffee with Cole's mother. "Your job," Cole heard her say before he closed his door on them both and got busy with his weapons, "yours and the children's, will be to let him stay focused on his work. There will be days you think you won't get through, but what your husband's dealing with now, he can't afford distractions." On the cliff above the lake, Cole shifted his damp towel out from under him and drew it over his bare shoulders. He clenched his jaw to keep his teeth from chattering. It was true what his mother said in the car that day. Life was funny in the sense that what had always been familiar could suddenly feel strange. Yet just as he knew that spring followed winter and winter followed fall, Cole also knew his father would return. He knew this. And when that happened, when the 18-month wait was finally over, and his father stepped again through the front door, stepped out of his uniform and back into his real life, he would discover something important about his family. They were loyal. They had not gone on without him. "Watch," he told Warren, getting to his feet. He dropped his towel in the weeds. Far off, he thought he saw the flash of an eagle setting down near the mouth of the creek. From this height, Cole felt small, but also brave and wild. Warren turned, maybe to ask the question again, But before he could speak, Cole locked his breath deep inside his lungs and flung himself from the edge. He sailed silently toward the water, a flesh and blood cannonball bound for its mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefani Farris, and thanks everyone for coming and being patient, and thanks to Kristen, Sugar, and everyone at the Center for Fiction for hosting, and thanks to Paul Wasserman for secretly being here. He will be the ultimate reader tonight, and he is a veteran of the Iraq War, where he served as a sergeant in an Army aircrew. He has published 2 volumes of poetry based on his time overseas, Say Again All, and Minaret, and First Poem, and is at work on a war novel. He lives in Brooklyn. Paul Wasserman.
So I'm going to read the first few pages of the prologue of a war novel in progress. And much like some of the other people, this is also aviation related. So we've got 4 soldiers in a very small reconnaissance airplane. A sandstorm was blowing in from the north and made landing at Al-Sara airfield out of the question. So instead of going home, we were diverted to Balad for what became a 3-day brownout. We'd been IVO Ramadi since dawn, in the vicinity of, photographing a village for an upcoming raid, quiet work, when Tower broadcast the word to come in. The sudden stack of aircraft on his city told the enemy he was watching his luck increase on the other side of the wall. The airfield was under attack by the time we showed up. Nothing was allowed to take off or land, save for the Apaches sent out to counterattack. Part of the base perimeter ran up against the city limits, and the helos buzzed the boundary, looking for puffs of smoke to engage, points of origin for mortar and rocket fire. Meanwhile, every bird summoned because of the storm was now given the saintly order to maintain current angels, to sit tight in orbit at whatever altitude they happened to be at for the duration of the attack. We burned circles at 600 feet, small arms range. A man on his roof with his rifle could drop us. Permission to land would not come more quickly no matter what we did. I touched my face to the oval mask of the airplane window and looked at the war. See the size of that courtyard? School, possible. See those loudspeakers tied up? Mosque, probable. See the checkpoint at traffic circle? Heavy weapons present. From the sky, the composition is unlayered, self-summarizing, the symbol no different from the secret. 7 o'clock on the orbit, rural area, man on foot with his back to the city, steadily leading animals into the oblivion. 1 o'clock, dismounted patrol east on Route Hannah, squad hearts clicking at intervals in readiness. In between is a gradation, the vanishing pasture and erupting grid. The apparent world is the only world. See the shepherd and hunter at the poles? See anything high speed? Mr. Lubb's in my ear. Mission PIC, pilot in command. Mr. Lubb's was a black warrant officer who called everyone high speed. NSTR, nothing significant to report. You can take us down now, Chief, I added. He blew a small cough of laughter into the mic. I think the man who runs the ride forgot he left us up here. We could hear nothing of the fight below, of course. That kind of waiting makes one perfectly aware of destiny. We're cleared, on approach. Mr. Lubb's over comms. He spoke crisply now. I leaned out of my workstation and nodded to Summers in seat 1, our new PFC, private first class. He yet had no idea where he was. When 9/11 happened, he was in 7th grade. I was 25. But Summers knew enough to notice how little we spoke while orbiting, and to mimic the pack. 10 seconds later, we were on the ground. I popped the air stair door and crept out into the heat. No pouring black smoke, no craters, no chaos. The other pilot, Master Mac, a rust-colored turtle, ex-rifleman, was yawning and rubbing his belly. He wore an unauthorized infidel tab on the left shoulder of his flight suit that no commander ever told him to remove. The wife wouldn't like that at all, he said. Summers was learning. This job was different. You had to know when to be afraid. The four of us shared an instant's eye contact and smile. His will is our peace. Then the pilots headed to flight ops to get the weather. We still had to send the supported unit their pictures from our shortened recon. I tasked Summers with finding an intel shot that would dump our imagery down the right hole. I used the rank force. Get this done as quickly and correctly as possible. Roger? Roger, Sergeant. In the Army, sergeant is pronounced with one syllable by the enlisted, two by the officers. I gave him the little black box, and he moved quickly across the flight line, fading into the warehouse asylum sprawl of the LSA, Logistical Support Area. We'd all meet for chow in 2 hours. I went exploring. A haze of umber dust was rising from the gravel. I was walking along a blast wall, tracing the rock with my fingertips, avoiding the need to salute, when the rock ended and I had to cut through a small parking lot where one of the mortars from the attack had landed. A fireman was pumping jellied snow into a charred vehicle, and a soldier lay in the bed of a pickup truck. One leg was thickly bandaged and splinted and elevated. He was up on one elbow, looking at his wound, speaking gently. He was talking to himself like a pet. A medic stood next to him, holding a quiet walkie-talkie, and went over and asked the medic for directions to the nearest chapette. It is true that when I was just a few days in theater, I was on lunch break for my newbies tour, sitting in a chow hall in Tikrit, and a soldier came in and shouted, "Anyone here from the cache? We got 10 wounded on the way. Combat Support Hospital." And that I was instantly sick to my stomach. So I stood up and walked around the chow hall to try and get a breeze into my face. And then I passed the ice cream station, where a major was trying to convince the foreign national working the scooper that he did indeed want both chocolate sauce and pineapple sauce on his sundae. And that the foreign national, who was wearing a bow tie and a paper hat, was reluctant to believe in the major's desire. And that I returned to the table with a bottle of ice water and sipped at it until I thought I could speak again without heaving. But it isn't true anymore. A small bazaar was commencing around the PX, Post Exchange. A jeweler had lengths of chain draped around the neck of a male mannequin. He cut the chain with pliers, then coiled it into a fruit scale. You paid by the weight of the links. A digital sign gave the day's gold price in dollars and denarii, and below that was the time and temperature, 0930-128. A tailor leaned in his booth surrounded by bolts of cloth. He'd print anything on a t-shirt you wrote out for him. The 3 stages of a tour, hua, rebellion, macabre, hung behind him as samples on a string. Deploy and destroy. I heard we're in Cambodia. Mom, I'll call back when the mortars stop. This last design referenced all the incoming Balad was known to receive. The incoming originated from civilian areas, and targets were scarce. So it was left to the idea fairies to counter the mortars with feats of engineering. The reinforcement of a second roof crouched over the gym on riveted spider legs. A naval battery was installed at a crossroads to blast incoming out of the air. Its effect was an insane silhouette. Skyward ship guns marooned in the desert. I went into the day room of an MWR, Morale, Welfare, Recreation, and caught the last hour of Barry Lyndon. Someone at Armed Forces Network must have thought it was a war movie because of the cover. The stepson was preparing to strike down Lyndon, payback for the whippings and the squandered fortune and the infidelities to his mother. I wanted to draw a line of Avengers from Telemachus to Hamlet to the stepson, but the MP I was watching with, military police, thought the more important story was Lyndon toward his real son. He does love his boy, I give him that, the MP went on, but he lies to him about his war story, like a pimp. The MP said Lyndon lies to seem perfect to his son. The boy would have loved him with no war story at all, I thought. I won't lie to my kid about Iraqistan, said the MP. I'll just leave out the loud parts. Keep it there.